Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Fast Forward Guest Series Edition 2030. I would like to introduce our guest speaker for today, Dr. S. Pungati. She is the Senior Scientist and Head of Clinical Operations at Madras Diabetes Research Foundation. She has over 25 years of global experience, having supervised 165 phase 2 to 4 clinical trials, national and international. She has led studies for leading multinational pharmaceutical companies and academic institutions, including Novo Nordisk, Novartis, Pfizer, Duke University, and McMaster University. An accomplished researcher with 50 plus publications in national and international journals, with expertise in diabetes, impaired glucose tolerance, depression, and related complications. A sought after speaker on clinical trial operations, site management, and patient recruitment and retention. She holds key leadership roles in global studies and has extensive experience in ethics, governance, serving on institutional ethics committees, and as a scientific member of the Indian Society of Clinical Research. We welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you, Pooja, for the nice introduction. So, further delay, we will proceed with the presentation. Okay, welcome all for this webinar on clinical research, how clinical research is going to be in future. So, I'm going to touch base on all those three aspects of the main research. So, I'm audible, right? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Yes, thanks. Before that, I would like to, I understood from Pooja that you have a background of a combination of biotechnology, clinical research, and also medicourse here. So with this, am I right, Pooja? There's people who are attending this meeting.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So I've actually, she already introduced me. I'm Punga De. I head the Department of Clinical Research. Last 3 decades, and as she gave 165, the current number we completed is 172. And the main aspect of our trial is we looking for good retention. That is what we are well known across the globe. Okay. So, what is introduction? I think no need for any further. Definition for this. As you know, what is clinical trial? But it's my duty to just take you up what clinical trial is, because the new drugs which we are trying on patients for the first time, because we have done a phase 1-2 trials, or especially preclinical and phase 1, then it comes to the disease subjects as phase 2. So we were looking for the toxicity, safety, and also the tolerability and then efficacy. And then later it comes to the market. That is how a clinical trial is done. And it is a prospective study with about a long duration of drug discovery which comes to the market. Probably minimum it takes 5 and maximum it takes even 10 years for the drug to come to the market. And what is that a clinical research study? That is different. That is an academic study. So we are working in a clinical operations sector. Probably if you're going for an academic study, what you have to look in is a different aspect where there doesn't have much of ethics regulations, but there is also something called other guidelines, ICMR guidelines, which allow you to conduct a trial in a proper way. So as we know what it benefits, everyone knows, because you're getting the updated new drug, the efficacy of the new drug, the benefits the patients. Like the recent discovery, as you know, if you take for diabetes, the drugs like analog, which has come in a big way. If you know, like most of the celebrities are using that drug. The uses weight, right? There is a lot of weight loss once you start using it, and they find it very comfortable. But there are a lot of side effects that too. But they address everything in a proper way. That is how a new drugs comes. The society gets benefits of, and there are also side effects. We don't see any drug comes to the market without a reason. It is there. So for conducting a trial, it is very important. We have to be a good line with the guidelines, especially everyone who is part of this clinical trial journey should have a GCP training. Apart from that, the government has given us an NDCT route, which is only for India. That I just take you a couple of slides what it talks about. Okay. And other thing, apart from clinical trials, there are trials that are like investigator-driven trials. So where you have an opportunity to even publish your data. When you do a pharma studies, you don't have the opportunity to publish any data because it is patented. But when you do a trial for a investigator or you make your own trial, there are a lot of opportunity to publish your data, right? So you have to understand who are the clinical research stakeholders, right? Like you have the sponsor, who discovered the drug will come to you and say, as a site level, I'm from a site. So they say, do the trial. So I do it. So that is what we come under. We come under the investigators and research team. And that is also part of this. And Institutional Ethics Committee, what does it know? We will be just taking a couple of slides on what they do it in favor of clinical trials. And also, as you know, there are clinical research organizations. Maybe they will be doing most of the study. The sponsor will give it to them and they run the study. And there are government agencies like DBT, VST and ICMR. So there are grants. So like if you are coming out to a career where you want to take it up a clinical research or you want to take it something like a research oriented, then you can go for this kind of a DBT, VST and ICMR funding, which gives a lot of opportunity for you to get some grant and get your own hypothesis get done and you get your data published. So this is in a nutshell. But apart from that, what is so interesting about this, you can't do all this without participants, right? You have to have a participant to do a trial. So that is why the prime person for any trial or any research, we need the patients or the participants. So they are these main stakeholders. And there is no need for explanation of GCP guidelines, which you must be aware of. So how you design, conduct and record and report a study. You could design a study, conduct, and the way how you conduct, are you following the GCP guidelines is very...
Oi, a purple color card.
Yeah, I think there is something to be muted. Someone, can you just mute your thing? Okay. And it's like what you say is whatever you do is documentation. So you are just learning, it's more of theory. When you come to a place where you start working, then you understand the meaning of a GCP. That is, whatever you do, you have to record. For an example, when I started my career 30 years ago, we had an audit from two auditors, one from Japan and one from Denmark. And our co-investigator, so meticulously he does BP recording, he does everything. But what happened, he recorded only one blood pressure reading, but unfortunately he left the other BP reading. And what they found is that when we say, yeah, we had all the reading, we have everything, no, say, where is the evidence? So that is how, whatever you do, you document. That is very, very important of ICC GCP guidelines. And this is what very interesting is the NDCT rules. So don't say this WISE schedule, which we have been following earlier. Now everything comes under the NDCT rules, that is 2019. If you have not read this, it is very important for you to understand what it says and how the guidelines have changed. Okay, it is the governing body is the NDCT rules that is under the DCGI. So we all fall under, if you are doing a clinical research, then we have to report everything to the Controller of India on a timely basis and even day-to-day basis. And they have differently changed some important aspects, like what should be the ethical committee composition. Okay, if anyone doesn't know what I'm trying to say, you can just even put it to your chat box. Pooja can come back with what the questions on what I'm talking to. And what happens is that the ethical committee has got different norms now. It doesn't change. Earlier, if you are conducting a clinical trial here, even 100 kilometers or even 200 kilometers, or even if you are going to the next stage, they can give an approval. But here, they made it very, 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 very strict, only 50 kilometers. So anybody above 50 kilometers in the ethics committee cannot give an approval. Right? And what happens, the reason for that is that the ethics committee should monitor what is happening at the site, should be monitored on a day-to-day basis, and we have to report everything what is happening at the site. And see, if I'm from a site perspective, I would like to know, because we are going to talk about the traditional clinical trials, we are going to talk about the decentralized clinical trials, and about few slides on how AI is going to take up across in future. So now the insights which we learned, and I learned the site level execution. Suppose if you are trying to choose a career where you want to go at a site level, there are a lot of challenges. It's not easy. It is not easy to do a trial. You can't just take one paper and say, yeah. No, it was easy. But why these strict guidelines came in? Because there was unethical trials were done in the past. I think in 2013, what he did, no, these are the trials where it should be monitored well. You can't get a patient with the study without informed consent, without nothing, without telling them like what happened in earlier days. You remember the Nuremberg Code, the syphilis studies, all this came without any consent, without involving the patient. So they brought this guidelines for the ICH GCP guidelines, and there come the Institution Ethics Committee. So having said all this, what happened? After that also, the things were phenomenal. But in 2013, before that, what about unethical trial being done? Not even given consent, not even telling what is going to do that. So there came this kind of a law where it becomes so stringent. If you go to other parts of the world, like if you go out of India, you don't find this difficulty of doing a trial. Each line, everything is true transparent. So whatever you do, it is known to the government. You can't hide even a letter. And if they smell something wrong, then they definitely come in without even noticing us. So that is how the execution of traditional trial is very, very important. This forms a base for any clinical trial, right? My consideration is that if you understand this very well, then you can go for DCT, the decentralized, or the A. A is like an algorithm, whatever you give, it's like a machine, it gives whatever, and more technical and accuracy is 100%. But as a ground level, you have to understand this. If you're choosing a career apart from a site, or you want to go to a sponsor, the sponsor also has a norms, but they deal more with the documentation rather than dealing with the patients, right? So now, as what the ICGCP section, if you go to this investigator regulations rules, what is 4.1 to 4.13, if you are not aware of it, you can just go to that and see what it says. The investigator should have a proper qualification, adequate resources. What does it mean, adequate resources? You should have adequate staffing, you should have all the infrastructure, you should have a minus 20 degrees, minus 80 degree refrigerator, and also a fast internet connectivity and a space for the monitors to sit and monitor your activities. And also on top of it, you should have an archival room. All this come under the resources and the infrastructure. So Medicare care for trial subjects. If it is a trial subject, additional care should be given because we are trying a new drug on the patient. So that is very, very important, and monitoring is very, very important in the medical management of these trial subjects. And communication with the ethics committee and protocol compliance with the protocol. And you have the investigational product, whatever drugs coming from the sponsor or from the CRO, it should be maintained at the proper temperature at the site. And also randomization and unblinding. Yeah, unblinding is, it may not happen, but at times we want to unblind, you have that right as an investigator. You can check with the sponsor, please unblind. Because it happened in the past for one of our trials. What happened, that trial was stopped abruptly. They said stop the trial because some kind of an alarm they got. They say it is causing like a kind of, it was somewhere the rat, though the drug was well established and we are doing a phase 3 trial, and someone at the other end was also trying to do some on the animal model, and they find there is like a bladder, in urinary bladder, they found a carcinoma. So it happened in only one rat, and they made it as a big blast, and they said no, it should be informed. And the study was asked to be terminated. And we got an information, and we were able to inform and the drug was wonderful drug. The triglycerides came down, the cholesterol came down, the diabetes, everything came down. What happened is then suddenly one of the patient was not here. It was not reachable. I was not reachable. So I informed the participant's son and attendant that please inform your dad. I will give his number. He said, no, I will inform, don't wait. And that participant had some problem. He said he had nocturia, that is, he has been passing urine very frequent. So my bladder has some concern because of your drug. And luckily, that was a situation where we as a site, as our PI, will just take a decision and call the sponsor. We will unblind and see what it is. And luckily, it was a placebo. Informed consent is very, very important, where there are a couple of slides how the informed consent to be taken, in the records and reports to be kept. And now the archival is increased to 25 years. I think you must be aware of, where there was ICGCP regulation says only 15 years. Now the European Medical Association and EMA says it should be 25 years. So when they want to retrieve and see this drug, the adverse event not been reported properly, they can take and say what has happened. So that is also an important aspect. So we have to look in for the reports, and archival is very important, safety reporting, and you can also do a premature termination and final report. So this is the nutshell, the role of an investigator. If you want to choose as your career as a site level, you have to understand what is the role of the investigator, because majorly you will be doing it and the investigator will supervise. And when I talk about the recruitment, see, what are the main challenges when you do a trial at a site level? See, the goal is to recruit and retain subjects See, suppose you found something. Yeah, I think that vitamin D deficiency is high in a type 2 diabetes, or it is high in a patient who has got hypertension. If your hypothesis say that, and you have enough sample size, you can't have just 10, 50, but you have come up with a sample size of 100. And to achieve that 100, you should definitely get, otherwise you will fail to answer your hypothesis. So for that, recruitment plays a major role, right? So what is the recruitment is that you have to start digging your own data. I will tell you how it can be done in our methods of recruitment. This plays a key role. And not only recruitment, once you recruit, you don't think that you will have a follow-up for about, suppose you do a 5 years long-term study. You can't say, you can't definitely say that I'll have 5 years follow-up. No, it's very difficult. That is why you have to have a good rapport with the participants. I said recruitment and retentions are both very important. They just close hands together and we say it's ask for it. So this is how we do at our side. We have a big database, we have electronic database, we have ongoing population-based studies, and we have relatives of diabetic subjects in the OPD and the patients, and they go to the other members and say there is some trial going so and so. And the staff at our center, they talk to the neighbors, not our clinical trial staff, because the confidentiality should not go. So other staff members at our institute go to the neighbors, friends, relatives and say, there is some trial, like that. And we also reach out to the organization. But very important, you have to crystal clear say what is the study. You can't hide anything to the public. If you're going and reaching a patient, if you're talking about an informed consent, main thing is that you have to say what you're going to do. What is a negative of the study, what is a positive of the study is very important, right? And retention is very important. It's see, what is main important thing in any trial is retaining the patients for 100% follow-up. Otherwise, as I said, you don't get the data. So we are very good at it. Of the 172 trials I completed, we are close to 170 trials with 100% retention. And that's why we have been called across globe to give a talk on retention. So it is a wide subject, which I am also sharing a paper at a leisure, and you can just go and then see how retention can be done in a clinical trial. So that will also take 1 hour for me to explain retention. What is that? But in a couple of slides, I'm explaining what retention. So this is a very important aspect of retention. So we do a kind of retention at ours. The thing is that we educate the patient why we are trying, and also share them what has happened to them. After entering into the trial, what has happened, monitoring whether reduction in the sugar level or reduction in the stress level, everything we'll monitor and inform them. And at times the patients may not come to us, and then we have to go to the patient's house and say what has happened, why they are not come, what is the reason. And also educating on the exercise. And we also update with the newsletter, and minimizing waiting time, and also being always close contact with the participant. Keep it in mind, if you're going for a profession like a CRA or a clinical research associate or a clinical assistant or a research assistant, keep it in mind, always keep in close contact with the patients. Though the protocol doesn't say, the protocol say 1 week, later 2 weeks, then 2 weeks, then 1 month. It is not the way. You have to have the in close contact so that you may not lose a patient. That's very important. And these are the gift items. If needed, we can give some blood glucose monitor, and also a kind of a blood pressure monitor, whatever it is, we can give it to them if needed. Otherwise, what we do is that we give a memento for a good glycemic control. Suppose your patient has done very good job, and we just pick 3 patients and say, yeah, you have done a very good job. This is where you can retain the patient and make them happy about why they are doing what they are doing. And also keep informing them this is what you are contributing to the society. And don't always force a patient to be part of the study. Be very friendly and very true. And that is how you can retain for that 100% retention. And these are very large studies. We take all this study where they are a new system called involving a national study coordinator. So if you're going to a site, you'll be going as a study coordinator. So they have done this study with a national study coordinator. You can look at the retention rate. You can see everywhere it is 99%, 98%. That shows earlier it was only 78%, 60%. Because most of the retention phase, the reason for that, you don't have a stringent criteria to follow. But the reason being it has changed very good. And this is a country level I'm saying. But our side, we have 100% retention. So every country across country, we form this as water retention. So this is my paper. If you want, you can just take a look at it. You have time. I have given in and out of how, what are the different strategies to do a clinical trial retention is very, very good. You can have a look at it. Okay. And what is this? The site is very informed consent. So 4.8 informed consent of trial something. So without that, what happens? You are not informed the patient. It is unethically you're doing a trial. This is where most of the finding comes from an audit perspective. A regulatory audit, whether it is FDA, EMEA, or the DCA, they find out something, the informed consent is not given properly. So this 4.8 is very, very important. So what is it? It has two portions. It is not only the informed consent 2-page or 1-page. It has got a patient information sheet. That information should be understandable language. You can't give a language which is not easy for the patient to understand. It should not have a technical definitions. Like even if we say hypertension, no, it should be blood pressure. You can't say hyperglycemia, it should be blood sugar. So that is our simplified version for the patient, because we try to understand that you're talking to a lay person. Okay, so that information should have how many times the patient has to come, what are the tests should be done. Different elements are there. Okay, so that is very important. And see, just the elements, I can just take you. If you are aware of it, is fine. But otherwise, your protocol, ICF should have the informed consent, should have the number, name, purpose of the study in a layman language, why we are doing, and the duration and the subject involvement, how long they have to be, like about 1 month, 2 months, 10 months, or whatever it is. And then the risk and benefits, very, very important. You have any alternative medicine treatment, that also should be discussed. Confidentiality, number of subjects should be included, and compensation for injury. Suppose when you do drug trial, it could happen, the patient may develop any kind of serious adverse event. It could be relevant to the drug or not, but you have to prove it to the BCGI. It is not relevant, it is relevant. If it is relevant, then they have to pay a compensation for the injury or any medical management. It is under clause. So if you want to find more details, you go to the CDSCO network and you can find a lot of information and compensation for injury. Whether you're going to go for a site level job or you're going to go for a sponsor level job, compensation for injury is very mandatory and you have to understand that. And then you should also have time for questions to be asked, and the description of the participation, everything should be recorded in it. And travel reimbursement, these are all very, very transparent. You can't give 500, 200, it is not possible. At least name of 1,000 rupees for the travel reimbursement. It is not like you are compensating for the work that day, at least for them to come here and be there and then do the test and investigations. And also, the travel reimbursement should not be an inducement at any time. You can't give 5,000 and then they immediately part. Like if the government is giving 5,000 for voting, not like that. You should not induce patient. You say minimal travel reimbursement where you're not inducing the patient to be part of it. So that is very important. So most of our ethics committee rejects. They say if they're giving 3,000, say no. So in that way, you have to looking for any informed consent, whatever you're developing in future. Okay. And you have to give a copy of the consent to the patient, and one copy you should have because it's very, very important. And the patient who is signing the consent should also take it. So in case if the patient's irritated, what you do? This is what the nutshell of how an informed consent to be obtained. A patient literate, no problem, he will sign the informed consent, he give one copy to the patient. And as a site level, you have to keep one copy. But if the patient is illiterate, so he can have a town impression, and you can have a legally accepted representative to also sign. But the legally accepted representative is also or illiterate, you should have a witness. The witness should be outside your study team, so they should sign. So this is very, very important. So the informed consent process, he can't have a date in one color and the signature in another. That is also a finding. Okay, it is very, very important. This is a very important step when you do a study. Please, please, please have it in mind. If you're going for fresh to a career, see that informed consent, all these important elements are there, and also assure that's how it is to be taken up. Okay, after informed consent only, a activity started. That is activity 1, 2, 3. Whatever the protocol says will start after the informed consent. Keep this in mind. Don't do it anything yours, then you will get into trouble. And just having said that, we talked about recruitment, retention, informed. So now comes the ethics. What is it? They are the major pillar for why we had this ethics, because earlier the unfair trials were done. So they bought this kind of a members. They should have enough members with different aspects of role, like a physician, a layperson is mandatory, a lawyer is mandatory, and also you should have an expert. Suppose you want to do a study on psychology, and you have an ethics committee where you don't have a psychologist, you can hire for that protocol alone, and they will not vote. So voting is given only for the ethics committee members. Okay, they should fulfill all the requirement of the NDCT rules. And earlier what they had is that they were all male members, more 100% male members, and they're not female. Now they equal gender representative from the ethics committee. So what they do, they look into the rights and safety of the well-being. Is very, very important. Okay. Now why this is where they look in. They follow the Bellman report. They say the respect of the person is taken care, or the patient is taken, the justice and beneficence. So a drug can go, you can't say a drug will give 100% benefit. There will be risk. So the chances of risk should be 0.5%, not more than that. So you can see 1%. So that is where we have the data safety monitoring committee, which at a higher level looks whether the drug is not harming the patient. So that's why the beneficence should be more rather than your, the harm you are doing. So always leave that is where this ethics committee play a major role. And as I already said, they protect the dignity, rights and well-being of the patients. And they also do a rigorous scientific evaluation. Why I am talking about rigorous scientific evaluation is that there are drugs which comes to the market like it is a Me Too trial, you just have one already existing molecule, then they do. What is that? There's no scientific, it's only marketing. So we don't accept that. So scientific evaluation is very, very important. At some places, they even scientific team or scientific committee which looks at, and also they look into the ethical aspects. So continuous monitoring, it has become very, very important for trials. So safety reporting. So the investigator should report this adverse event within 24 hours. Not even one later. Suppose the day you come to know, suppose the patient died 2 days ago, but you come to know only today, then you got 24 hours of reporting to the where? To the investigators, report to the sponsor, to the licensing authority, that is a DCJ, and to the ethics committee. And we have a table 5. If you want to have a look at this, that is available in the website. Go to CDSUO. It talks about table 5 and how it should be done. It's all meticulous work. That's why I said the clinical trials doing at site level has become very, very challenging. It is not like what it was. That's why things are getting into shape like doing a DCT or AI. Now, flowchart of reporting, the investigator has to report to the sponsor, DCJ, EC. So it doesn't stop there. That is within 1 day. But we have to give a detailed report of the adverse event, that is any untoward event happened within 14 calendar days to the DCT. And what happens, the ethics committee also has to report within 60 days stating this is not an adverse event because of the drug. It is something the patient has got a pre-existing condition. So that clarity should go from the ethics committee to the government. So you can see how the government is looking at our activity. So when you take up a role like this, be sure and always be frank and honest, and you can't hide things. That's very important when you take up this kind of a job. And this is what So this is what the CTSCO online government homepage. You can go there and see how it can be done. And this is Sugam portal. Earlier, when we report an adverse event, we report by post, we report by mail, but now it has gone online. Within 24 hours, it should go. So there is an active and passive in this. So you can report it actively, immediately. So you have to do it within 24 hours and they come back with questions. So you would have the ethics committee play a major role now. And in any kind of new drugs, subsequent new drugs investigation, you are going to register also. Everything goes by this portal, right? Yeah. As a researcher, what I would like to say, if you want to take it up in academic study, and this is CTRA, that is Clinical Trial Registry of India. You can't do or come out with a paper without registering in the CTRA. That's very, very important. This CTRA is mandatory. Okay. If you are not doing it, please do it. There is nobody's asking. You can't do a retrospective. Earlier, the government gave a kind of relaxation. You can do, retrospectively, but now it is not that. Very strict. If you do a trial, it should be registered. Otherwise, you can't even publish your data. You have your paper lying down and you can't publish what you have discovered or what you have found out. So when you do a pharmaceutical trials, what happens? The sponsor takes a responsibility, they do it. But if you are doing a trial, it has to be registered under this and you have a username, password. And every time you go in and you can do it. But once you do this, you can't stop it. You have to give a 6 months update to this. You have to give a 6 months update. And later, 6 months later, and if the study is also over, you have to update. So this is very important. Now the government has taken a very strict rule on it. So you can't come out with any paper if you don't register under this. Okay. And what is the traditional model which we discussed now? It is site-based, investigator-centric study. And the participant listen to the site, which we all know. And we collect the data manually and also paper-based or basic electronic data collection. This is all well known. So this is very important is that everything we do at a site, right? You are clear? What I discuss at a site level is what I'm just giving a small definition. This is all done. Sample collection is done. Everything, paper questionnaires or questions, vital signs, everything is done at the site the patient comes. It is traditional clinical trial. And what are the advantages you feel? It is a strong regulatory familiarity. Very, very strong. It is not very because every papers, everything will be in your hand. And the system is so systematic. You update to the EC, everything is done. And you can control the protocol adherence. You can 100% control the protocol adherence because they come regularly, you follow them. It's all happening. And another important aspect is that you have a patient and direct patient investigator interaction. Okay. These are the main advantage. You agree or not, this is even though whatever happens, I'm in here for this year's only the site level. But even I've done DCK, I'm not saying that I have not done decentralized trial, but this is the best because you have an interact with the patient and the investigator where it is too promising and the patient will be part of the study and you give a data. Okay. And then the limitation is high cost and long time. The problem is currently in clinical trials, when you do a traditional clinical trial, what happens is that 80% of the recruitment is delay. The reason for that, I can give an example. Like it's earlier, what happened when you do a trial? The Western people, like the people in other countries, had the opportunity to do it earlier than us, and we, as a nations, we were little later. We start the study, so it was not so competitive. Now, if a study is coming, a phase 3 study across 34 sites in all across globe, you can say Europe, US, Japan, and all countries will be part of this, including India. And what happens? They have competitive recruitment. They immediately got the protocol, everything amendment done. They start the protocol because for them it is easy. There is no LDCT rule. Please keep this in mind. There is no LDCT rules. There is no norms like DCGA in India. They start the study when everything in place. They get an ethics committee approval. But here in India, we have to get the approval from the DCG. This is where the problem occurs. So I think few of the studies did not come to India because of the slow recruitment. The reason is that we will not get the approval from the government of India to start the study. So by that time, what happens? Other country will start, they complete the recruitment. So that is one of the problem in recruitment with respect to on the timeless when we talk about this studies. But even it is decentralized, also we have a problem. We can't say the long time it's across. But it's being a very competitive recruitment. Site in India, even 10 sites in India, one site will recruit more. They say I got enough patients, so that there are sometimes there are other sites will lack. So for that, the requirement of timelines will they exceed. Like 8 weeks of recruitment will go to 12 weeks. 12 weeks of recruitment timeline will go to. So that is slowing down this happens. And what happened? 20% of the recruitment, because of technical difficulty and other difficulty, the study cannot come. This is at least a scenario in a clinical trial. And other one is patient diversity is limited. You can't take many patients because you are doing at a site. The patient who comes to the site will only be part of the study. Okay, and the chances are higher dropouts due to travel burden. It is not only to travel burden; it is also due to the adverse events which happens. But in a trial like at the traditional level, the travel burden, they have to come all the way and spending no time. And the visit schedule, if you see the protocol, I don't know whether many of you have seen a protocol, definitely you would have seen, there will be 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. Where can you expect the patient to come every 2 weeks? So when you design a protocol, you should be very, very proper and what you have to look at. And the challenge of traditional clinical trials, apart from that, how do you address communication? Like even the communication from the sponsor to the site is also not so clear nowadays. They say something. Recently, I'd been to one of the new trial initiation. What they found is that they have something in the protocol and they communicate differently. And the site level people not able to understand. That communication, what we have with the sponsor is also difficult and with the patients. And if you don't communicate properly to the patient, what we do, at what time they stop, everything, it's difficult. It's a challenge. And engaging the patient is also very, very important. So we have to say like you have to come every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, then that is also a difficulty. And recruitment, as I said, we will not have many, diversity will be only one. So recruitment and time management, as we said, the timelines is extended in this kind of a traditional clinical trials, right? Now we will come to this, the transformation from, just have a little water for a minute. And this is just a moment. So now coming to the transformation from traditional to decentralized. So what does it mean? What is decentralized? You may be aware. I've written a paper on it. It got published just a few months ago. It's a wonderful paper. A decentralized clinical research, how you can do it at a site level, right? And this is a wonderful method of doing a trial where everything goes to the patient's house, right? So why this came in? Why this? The COVID has made it very, very prevalent. Earlier we had, in 2011 itself, the Pfizer has conducted the decentralized clinical trial. The pandemic has caused this. There's a kind of a big thing coming up in clinical trials. So even during the pandemic, we called the patient, we have done. We didn't call the patient, we have gone to the patient. So that is what? You're doing a trial outside the site. You have the site, but you're going outside and doing, that is what? On decentralized clinical trials. So 76% of the pharmaceutical company used it, the early phase of, because you can't, this is during a pandemic. You didn't feel that all the studies stopped? No. We at our site did studies, and CROs and many sponsors were conducting studies mostly on a hybrid mode. So this is one of the strategies. This is also my paper which got during COVID. You can see the strategies adopted to conduct clinical trials amidst of. It was very interesting paper. How we called the patients, how we did it, all through over phone. And the thing is that the patients were really feeling comfortable. The reason for that is that they were staying alone, and unfortunately their children are in other countries. And they didn't have any support. They, as a single parent or a husband and wife, were staying together. And this is very interesting where we have done this paper. If you can see, you will get an idea how a decentralized clinical trial can be done, right? This is in a nutshell, I can say how it is done. Partially or fully outside our traditional sites. So you have a center place where you can do the trial, and it can also be in a hybrid mode. You can have a site and remote, okay? And you can use all the digital tools, telemedicine, wearables, that is PROs, like ePROs, that is patient outcome report. and remote labs and home days, all this can be done. And e-consent, e-PROs, remote monitoring, televisits, and home delivery of it. This is what, in a nutshell, says how well DCT can be done. It is coming in a big way. I'm also giving a talk how my paper, how it can be done, how it can be implemented in a big studies which is going to come up. But there is also some challenges, right? What are the challenges? These are some more benefits I would. It time saves. It saves the time because DC trials is faster than the traditional clinical trial, as we all know. And improved patient recruitment, agree or not, because you are not taking only one diverse of people, you are exposed to many, the overall diversity is more. So you can recruit more patients and also retain patients because it's almost like over phone and you keep in touch, so it's very easy. And higher data quality because you get it all by electronically, so there are no chances for compromising this. And cost saving, it is also cost saving because they feel in the pharma field that it saves a lot of money. Okay, this is the benefits, right? And what is that it happens is that, as I told you about, the strength is already there. It improves the recruitment and retention. Patient convenience is very important. They don't need to come all the time. You don't call them every week, every 2 weeks. You can just say, yeah, you can come whenever you feel, or we will come there. It's fine. And real world data capture. So that says that you will have huge data because day-to-day life, how they deal with that condition. So that is where the real world data, that is really wonderful to do a trial. Understanding the real world data, do a trial is always the best. And operational complexity. What do you mean by operational complexity? You site-based data collections and it's all very digitalized, okay? That big digital burden to the site. You know what happens? They will have many software. Suppose a site will have 6 to 7 different software platforms to handle. So that becomes a kind of a limitations. It is operational complexity. And shippers, what you know, the shipping will come only to the site in a traditional clinical research. But here what happens, it goes directly to the patient's house. So we don't know how the temperature is maintained. So here, if it should be 2 to 80 degrees, it should be the room temperature. If it is, what happens normally, if it below or above the temperature requirement, then the drug cannot be used. But there you don't know what the patient and what temperature they are using it, how they are storing it. That is also operational complexity. And the data quality and standardization challenges also happens because we don't know, because the data, we have to collect the sensitive data, health data, and we should have also the cyber security. All this comes in. But the regulatory and ethical oversight is still evolving, but it is not as convenient as what we are doing in a traditional method, where we do more of ethical regulatory oversight when you do at a site level. So the regulatory and ethical oversight is also still evolving. So these are the limitations where we can't say that it cannot be addressed, but it can be addressed. So this is what we have to think. This is going to be a little future in clinical research. So what I say is that we can't fully decentralize, right? This is my take, because I say some studies which require MRI or CT scan, you can't have it at the patient's house, no? MRI, even many of the site may not have MRI. So they have to go directly to the MRI scan center. So this is technically you will have a lot of problem. Sometimes what happens, protocol may require a blood draw, and they at the kind of, if you do a PKPD sample, if you want to do a PKPD sample, there is also patients may not be convenient, and some healthcare professional to be there to address if they faint or whatever. So it is always better in these aspects. Decentralized clinical cannot be totally replace a traditional trial. So it cannot be fully decentralized, but a part, like a hybrid mode we can go for. So this is my paper which got published recently, and it's also very interesting because what I did is that I did a lot of literature review and find this, there are decentralized trials, but it's only perspective of the pharmaceutical company and the sponsors, but nobody has seen from the perspective of patients. So we got this published, and it is taken in a big way. So I am also sharing this. If you want, if you have time, you can also, it's all available in the net. Okay, this wonderful paper, how we can take up this decentralized trials in the future, right? So we discussed about the traditional method. Now what we had is that decentralized, and now artificial intelligence and shaping the future. How it's going to be implemented when you do a clinical trial. Okay, this is going to be a future. That's what we are saying. Very, very difficult, but it's doable. But we can't compromise few things in a clinical trials because we are testing something new on the patient, and some of the important aspect for running a trial cannot be just compromised just for AI. So what are they? It's integrated into the healthcare research. Now it is coming up in a way. And as you know, why it is coming up, the traditional as well as the DCT are facing limitations in speed and scalability. That is why we are having this AI which enhances the accuracy of decision making. Okay. So what is this? The benefits I would take to you, because what is that it does? It supports evidence-based clinical decision. But where are this decision it is coming from? Because the AI takes up a huge data from already published studies. It is not having anything, because the AI will go already published data and it will give you a protocol and we go by that. But it is all supporting evidence-based clinical decisions, right? Okay. And it also reduces administrative workload. There is no need for recruitment. You go to the electronic healthcare, it picks up everything and match for your recruitment, everything. And there is no paper CRF or even electronic CRF. Everything is taken by it. So administrative workload is reduced. Fine. And complex data sets, because if you want to do a trial with comorbidities and multiple disease, that interpretation of complex data set also it makes it very simple. And another thing what it does is that it continuously monitors the adverse events. It is not like even we miss it. So manually when you do, you miss it. But it improves patient safety and monitoring. So it continuously monitors the patient's adverse event and it brings to your notice that it is what and what to be done. And since all this work has been taken care by the AI, it allows the clinicians to focus on the patient care, right? So this is in a nutshell, it is 100% benefit, right? So, but there are some drawbacks. What are the limitations? If you think about it, it is in a clinical trial, it is good, but it relies only on the information which is already existing, right? Suppose if a protocol is already there, it tries to change not to the level as a human. So, whereas an earlier trial has about every 2 weeks the patient has to come. The blood draw to be taken 10 ml, 20 ml. So, it will not look into that. AI will not look at it. But as a human, if you involve a physician or a researcher, they will understand much better. So, AI should also be complement with the researchers. You can't do it alone. It can fix you. But if you want to change something in the protocol, you can modify. So new ideas may be difficult, but you can incorporate it. So AI should go all along with the researcher. And it can also sometimes inaccurate and mislead. Sometimes if you just even go for a chat GPT, if you ask for something, it will give you a lot of information which is not relevant. So that's why we don't go for a chat GPT. You try to get something. Instantly you get the information, but you can't apply it for the research. So you have to, it can at times fabricate research. See what happens, for an example, an adverse event happens somewhere, something. So it will fabricate that, and it has to go to the physician who will take a proper decision whether it is really an adverse event to be addressed or a serious. So that is where you need to have a person to monitor all this. And also the healthcare professional, if you did, the vital role, like the bond between the health professional and the patient is also gone. The absence is there. But we should, I don't say that we can't have an AA, but definitely have an AA with like using a patient-centered approach. And you have to, investigators should be delegated in the remote of a clinical research and even development, or even the AA gives you good protocol, just try to look at it. And also specific to trial patient populations, endpoints, and also the clarity of the distribution. It will give this shipment, all this is doable, that also to be checked. The sponsor should ensure the decentralization option in the early clinical development plan. So the AI can give you, it's a very good model, it's 100% accuracy, you get a wonderful data, But if you want to be an AA specialist, you should have this background of clinical research, right? So, I would like to conclude that AA does not replace traditional or decentralized, but it acts as an accelerator. It promotes a clinical trials much better way than a human being does. Okay, so that is where I emphasize a hybrid mode, like it says traditional DCT and AA. That is going to be a wonderful model if it is taken up. And it cannot replace our DCT models because support decision making in the efficiency, and we need human oversight. Very, very essential. Okay, very, very essential to have a human oversight. And also the regulatory become a very complex here. So because it creates an algorithm whether the safety, data integrity, everything should be taken care, and how complies with the ICGCP also we put it in the algorithm properly, otherwise it will mislead us. But always having a human oversight is mandatory when we do what AI studies. So you're going to come out of your career and want to go to a new career or whatever it is. These are the emerging career which is coming out. You can go for a clinical data scientist, in AI and digital health specialist. Decentralized trial coordinator is also coming up in a big way, and remote patient engagement and retention specialist also coming up. And there are now people like we have what do you call vendors for what distributing your drugs, vendors for collecting the sample, vendors for making to report your adverse event. There are many vendors. The same way there are some vendors who are coming for retention, because as I rightly said, if you don't have a proper retention, what happens? You can't do a clinical trial properly. And also the AI enables CRA. As you said, as I already told in all my discussion in my presentation, if you want to be an AI oriented clinical research person, then you should have this background of traditional clinical trials. Without that, you can't jump into an AI. But AA will enhance you much better professional, just not only traditionals. So there is a need for a hybrid skills also, clinical, technical, and also there is a demand for a regulatory and data letters. These are all very, very, very demanding job. And if you want to choose, I think it's all this option I'm leaving it to you. So you can looking for that, and there are so many things. We browse, you take all this. So what you have to do, this is the base. What I given is the base, and you have to try to build what you want to do. And the take-home message is that traditional and decentralized clinical trials are only methods, and this is just a technology that augments these methods. Okay, and if so far, to my knowledge, AI cannot replace human subject clinical trials. If few limitations which I told you, so it should be integrated along with the human, so that makes a wonderful clinical trials. So these are all I need to say. So I think that where I can stop with my talk, and you have any questions, I'm happy to take it up. I hope you understood what I said and what I wanted to say. So any questions, Pooja, anyone has got? They're happy to take it up.
Have you anytime felt retention of participants as a challenge in a clinical trial?
100%. Many times. See, for example, if you do a long-term study of 5 years and with adverse events, suppose that a drug is causing a GI problem, like a gastrointestinal problems, like the analogs which is coming out in market has got lot of side effects. Retailing the patient, because they will have a lot of side effects, and we can't say you to be part of the study. So what we have to do, be along with the patient, and then that's what the empathy is more important. Give them the space. Let them stop it for a while and then come back with the drug, and we can't force. So retention is very, 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 very challenging in any clinical trial. And then getting 100% is what I said, understanding the psychology of the patient the day one patient comes here. So understand in the sense, when you talk to the patient, at least spend more time. And we always call us VVI treatment. That is very important person there. So they should be escorted everywhere. What I do, I have a coordinators. They go along with the patient and be like their family. So when you spend more time and they feel someone is there to take care, so no worry. So that is it's an art. It is not simple thing. So it is very common, and most of the studies struggle because of this retention. So that's why now what they do, the big pharmaceutical company, they hire this national study coordinators, as I said. So they can, from the start, when they start the recruitment, they'll be there and you can do a trial without any difficulty in retention. And also we had most of the patients, like the 5-year study, what I did, the patient moved to Canada, but he gave me a mail ID and he sent everything. And luckily that study was a Canadian study. So I had that, opportunity to interact with those people. So I told the patient, you go there, give the blood. And also we got a license from the here to send the medication to the patient there, and everything went well. We have 100% in it. That is how you have to have a contact with the patients all the time. These are all very important tips to take it up. That's why I said it's a big chapter. If you talk about retention, it goes a long.
Yeah.
It's challenging. Yeah. Anything else? Anyone else got any questions? Are you all thorough? What you have to do? And what a clinical trial is, and how we are and where we are. And some of these papers may give more insight on how we should be done. So practically sitting in one place and we do in, day and out, we will know how difficult it is. So maybe you will have more knowledge theoretically, but when you do it practically, these are the obstacles you face in doing a trial.
Ma'am?
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Ma'am, I have a question to you. I was just thinking, like, you started your career 30 years ago in the field of clinical research. So I just wanted to know the career insights and how it was throughout the 30 years and your experiences, ma'am. And your educational background also.
Yeah, a nice question. I was zero in clinical trials. I don't know what clinical. I'm basically a nutritionist. I joined as a nutritionist as a patient educator. So I am very keen to look into all the documents, because when I joined here 30 years ago, I was a patient educator and a nutritionist. So I prescribed diet and all those things. But seeing my interest in taking a case sheet to look into all the data which are unfilled, I used to make a kind of a compile, and these are all missing. And seeing this, my Dr. Morgan started looking at me differently. So you're systematically doing things. So you're the right person to do clinical. So it's like pushing me into a swimming pool where I don't know how to swim, right? That was a condition. I was pushed to clinical trials, and then what I did is that they will give me one protocol. Dr. Mohan, he'll be very thorough. He know what to be done. So he will say, what is a primary objective? What is the secondary objective? What is a primary endpoint? So that is how I started learning. They give me a protocol. I start to work on it and started learning it. And on top of it, what I did, it did not. There is no like we were not Google and all was not that 30 years ago. I look into all the protocol. I like it, and then see what is this, and that's how I learned. And then I went for a couple of places to get training. I went even in Singapore and also US to get more training on that. And also internally I got a lot of training. So that is how I built my career in clinical research. But it is also monotonous, because 30 years of doing a one job, because you recruit, you retain, you do, but different drugs. I'm not saying one drug I work with, there are multiple drugs. If you name any drug here, I would have said, because anything with diabetes I would have done. We would have done, because all the pharmaceutical company, because what Pooja listed only few, any pharma company would have listed, we would have done that study. So that is one kind of experience. But my passion for research did not stop. My passion for research is that, as I said to you, academic studies. So I had a lot of want to do something. So I went for mental health, which was a field which was not touched that time when I did my PhD. So I just it was very, very new. Nobody knows what is depression in India at that time. I'm talking about 20 years ago, where nobody knows what is depression, what is that. So that was my first paper. When I published it, everyone, the Caucasians had depression. What is depression in India? Nobody had. That was my first paper when I published what is the prevalence of depression. So that is another way where I started looking at as a researcher also. So I didn't stop as a clinical trialist. I also had a passion for research. Still it is ongoing. And it didn't stop, because I want to do holistic approach also. So I'm not doing only clinical trials. I'm not doing only mental health. I'm also doing yoga, trying to find out whether holistic approach in this kind of people will help. So I'm still learning. I got after this just 3-4 years ago, I got my yoga diploma where I started working on how to deal with the patients, what condition. I'm still ongoing. I have my exams in March on therapy of what condition, what kind of yoga to be given. So this is what my learning process, it doesn't stop. It's still ongoing. I'm 61 now. So it's still ongoing. So there is no age for learning. There's nothing stops, but you have a passion. That's very, very important take-home message to you all. As a budding clinical research or researchers, you should have a constant passion and try to do something good and always have an empathy to the patients. And whatever you're doing should be honest and the data should be really 100% true. That is very important. You have to take it up. And fortunately, I have a very good boss that he has given all the liberty to do whatever I like. So, because it is for the community, it is for the society, so things are very smooth. So this is my history of what I am and what I am doing. Right?
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was so inspiring.
Yeah, thank you.
You are an inspirer.
Thank you. Because you should not stop learning. You should start. I mean, every day, any monitor comes, I said, I learned this from you. So they feel happy, Oh, ma'am, with 30 years of experience, she's saying she's learning. Yes. That is where you have to be very humble in whatever you learn. And they say there is a mistake, I agree. Yeah, I am to make it. So that is how you have to take it up your career. And then you can flourish in whatever field you would like to be. So my urge for research, my urge for clinical research doesn't stop. It keeps moving. Thanks. Any questions? Anything from anyone? I think all are well versed in clinical research, right? You can do any trials if you're given.
Ma'am, are you using the AI currently?
Oh, no, I'm not. That's what, if you are doing it, it's fine. I am not. That's what I'm saying. It's a very new topic to me. I thought it is going to come up, but I've not done it. DCT I've done, but AI is difficult. I don't know how it's going to be, but the future is going to have AI, more AI. But one thing, we can't replace totally a traditional or a DCT.
Yes.
Any other questions? Anyone?
Thank you so much, ma'am, for delivering such an insightful session today. We truly appreciate your time and expertise. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you all. Bye. All the very best. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, mom.
You hope you all understood what I said. Take-home message is very important. Thanks, everyone.